Alright, we're going to replace the pads and rotors on this '06 Nissan Altima. It's going to be the same process whether you have the 3.5 or the 2.5, regardless of trim. It should be the same process for '02 to '06, regardless of engine. And it's probably the same process for the later ones, but it's definitely exactly identical for '02 to '06, and this one's an '06. Before you take the weight off the wheel, make sure you loosen the lug nuts about 1 turn each. That way you'll be able to get them off once it's up in the air. Once you're secure on a jack stand, which I do have it on a jack stand there, I just like to leave the jack under it as well for a little extra assurance, or you can just use multiple jack stands. Then you can finish taking your lug nuts off, take your wheel off. Sometimes that sticks, sometimes they come right off. If it sticks, you can just try tapping around on it on the edge of the wheel. You don't want to do that on your tire, you'll bust the belts. Around on the edge of the wheel, sometimes you have to do it from the back to break it loose. If you don't have a rubber mallet, then you can use a hammer with a block of wood. Once you have the wheel off, now if you're replacing just the pads, then what you can do is just take this bolt out and this bolt out, and then you can separate just the caliper and leave the caliper bracket behind. But since we are replacing the rotor as well, we need to get this caliper bracket off because the rotor won't come out otherwise. So that's just going to be these two larger bolts. You have one there and one further down there that we need to remove. Alright, so these are 3/4 inch on mine. If they've ever been replaced, they might have a different size head or something like that, but on mine these are 3/4 here. They can be very tight at times, so you want to make sure you use a 6-point socket like that, preferably with a 1/2 inch drive, or you could end up breaking your 3/8 drive stuff. So then with those out, sometimes you can just wiggle it off. It will stick to the rotor a little, or you can just stick a screwdriver in and pry like that, top and bottom if need be. You need to set this on something. Don't let it dangle from this wire here, so I need 2 hands to do that. Okay, so like I said, don't let it hang from the line. Also, when you're prying it off, it starts to pinch. So just pry enough to get it started and then wiggle it off with your hands, making sure not to kink it here. And then set it on something. This is kind of precarious. It's still wanting to teeter on me. You should have something better than this, but I'm going to be careful, make sure I don't knock that over. What occurs if you hang it from that line, or God forbid if it falls, it can basically pinch that line and it'll close it off internally, and then your brakes will stick and you'll need to replace your brake line. So now I need to get the rotor off because I'm replacing the rotor. So usually they are stuck, and sometimes they have little screw holes where you can run the screw through and it'll push against the hub and help push it off for you, but in this case there is not. So basically you just got to tap around with it on a hammer until you break it free. Also, while you're doing that, make sure you don't hit your studs, because if you mess one of those up, then you won't be able to get your lug nut, or lug nut back on. There we go. That was fairly easy. Some of them had to beat the crap out of. That one just broke free, so don't be surprised if it's not that easy for you. So then, to get the pads out and make room for the new ones, you'll want to push this outer one out first. Leave this one in momentarily because you need to push that piston back in with a C-clamp. So for now, we just need to pop this one out. This was definitely a two-handed affair. They pretty much just push out. They have little ears that go inside those metal tabs, and I need 2 hands for this, so maybe once I get it out I can give you a better view of how they come out. But they just push in. Sometimes you might need to tap on them with a hammer and, you know, like a screwdriver or something to get them to start going. So for me this time around, it came out pretty easy, but then you run into this crap where it's hanging on here, and not all cars have this kind of stuff to where it gets caught. So in this instance, you would want to separate the caliper from the bracket, especially if the new stuff has that on, because the only way to get this out right now in this orientation is to bend the crap out of this to yank it out. I'm gonna just mount this back on here real quick, and then we'll take the caliper out of the caliper bracket so I can get those pads out a little more easily. So there's the 2 bolts. For me, they were 14mm. They were a lot easier to remove than those big ones. So then your caliper will just slide out of the bracket here, and my pads just kind of came out there. I mean, So then these will be easier to slide in and out. And this one's just, see, they got the little ears that hook in top and bottom like that. And yeah, it'll just pop out. I don't want this to fall. Okay, so that's the easy way to get your pads out. They pretty much just fall out and you got all this room. Tap them out, feed the new ones in, feed the caliper back over. So at this point, this is where a lot of people will say to lube these little slide pins that they ride on. They go in and out, and they're greased in here, and that's where you see the little grease packets at the automotive stores and such at the counter. A lot of people like to pull these out and grease them up so that they don't seize up on them. But in doing so, you risk potentially ripping that boot, which then will definitely allow dirt and crap to get in there and dry it out and seize it up. And if you can't find the little boots by themselves, if you do that, then at that point you might just have to replace the whole bracket. So for the sake of not having to replace anything else, I typically just leave them alone. But if you feel so inclined, you can literally just pop them out and then grease them up if you want and stick them back in. So then to push this piston back in to make sure you have clearance for your new pads, you'll need a C-clamp on it as such. You want to come up here, and this is the smallest brake reservoir cap I've ever seen. Take your reservoir cap off so that as you depress that piston, it'll allow the air to come out. Okay, so I kind of need two hands to do this to hold this so it doesn't fall, but you'll just situate it about like that with your old pad in there, and then just turn it until the piston's all the way depressed. Do it slowly. You don't want to go real fast and get any air bubbles in there. Just slowly turn the C-clamp until your piston's fully depressed. Alright, so that's fully depressed. You want to keep, you might have to back off and go and back off and go because this keeps trying to slide off, and you want to keep it as center as possible. Otherwise you'll try pushing that piston in on a bind. So if that starts to slip off, just back it out a little bit and get it as close to center as you can again. So that's fully depressed. So now I can release this. We'll get the new rotor on here, and then we can work on getting the pads in and everything mounted back up. Now on your hub here, if you have any excessive corrosion, whether it be rust or anything else on this surface here, you want to take a wire brush, and if it's bad enough, flathead screwdriver, chip it off. You want a nice flat mating surface for the rotor to mount to. Otherwise you can mount the rotor crooked, and then it'll wobble in and out in between the pads, and that's actually how you get hot spots on your rotor, or quote unquote warped rotor symptom. Also, torquing a wheel back on here is important to not create that situation as well, and we'll cover that here shortly. Now when you're handling the rotor, it's important not to touch it. You don't want to get grease, dirt, or oil from your hands, even if it's just your own natural body oil on it, because it can create a barrier between the pads and the rotor, so keep it clean. A lot of rotors, if you buy them from the automotive parts stores, they come with a type of grease or film on them so that they don't rust while in storage, and you actually need to get a can of brake parts cleaner and clean all that crap off before you mount them. But the supplier I buy these from, they're zinc plated and they're dry, so they don't have any of that stuff, so I don't have to do that. But a lot of them you will if they have that tacky crap on them. These are labeled for me. Obviously, if you're not drilled and slotted, it doesn't matter. If you're drilled and slotted like these, then the slots will just basically point to the back of the vehicle. Alright, so I got my bracket bolts back in. Snug them down real good. If you want a torque spec, you want to torque them about 60-65 foot-pounds of torque. Alright, so once that's torqued down, you can slide your pads in here. Now some kits, the pad only comes with one squealer, and what that is it starts to touch the rotor when your pad's almost gone, and it'll squeal to let you know that you need to replace your pads. If your pads only have one for each side with that, you'll put it on the rear, because the rear will wear out faster with a single piston caliper like that. So now we can finesse these in here. I'm going to need both hands. Same goes for these. Don't touch the surface with your dirty fingers or nothing. So you basically just slide the ear in there. Same up there. Move that tang out of the way. Same on the rear. So I'm going to need both hands to pop these in here real quick. As far as the extra hardware goes, like this, these retaining clips that were here while the pads were out, Some kits will come with new hardware. Mine did not. If it does, you can replace it if you want. Typically, I just reuse what's already there, provided that it's there and not falling into itty-bitty pieces, because it's a real pain in the butt to get it out and get the new ones in sometimes. And sometimes the old ones, your pads will fit, and the new ones aren't manufactured quite right, and then you can't get everything to go in together. So I will typically reuse the old ones if I can. Replace at your own discretion, and you definitely do want something in there, because without this extra metal here, retaining clips, there'll be too much space in between there, and your pads can actually wobble and move around, and it can create uneven wear, and you can even hear it rattling around going down the road. So I got, that's interesting, this one's flush here, but this one's definitely sticking off the back side. I'm not sure why. Well, I switched the other one in there, and I had the same issue. It's lining up now, because actually what occurred was the rotor wasn't completely flush and pushed on there. That's why I had that gap. So I pushed on the rotor, and then now they're where they should be. So now we just slide this over. A little difficult to do while recording here. Basically just loop it over like that, line that up, and get those bolts back in there, and I'll get you a torque spec on that in a second. They need to be careful sliding these on there. They actually have if this would focus, they have a flat edge there, and the bracket has a little flat edge too, so you have to have it in the right orientation so it'll go on there properly. If you have it turned the wrong way like that, then it's going to be messed up. So make sure you get the flat edge on the flat edge. Alright, your torque spec on your caliper bolts there, these little ones, 20 foot-pounds of torque. So I got everything torqued down, everything's installed properly. Now we can throw the wheel back on. Once you get your wheel back on, get your lug nuts tightened on, hand tight. Then what you want to do, you want to torque this in 3 steps so that it mounts completely flush. What happens is, if you just put it on and tighten it down all at once, it might be cockeyed a little bit, which will also make your rotor be cockeyed, and then that's how you get that hot spot warped rotor symptom. So a lot of people underestimate this, but you're actually supposed to torque these on in a specific way. So what you want to do is a crisscross pattern. Never torque one next to the other. You want to, especially on these 5 lugs, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do a star pattern, crisscross. That way you're not ever doing one next to the other in succession. So you go like this, and then you want to torque in 3 or 4 steps. I like to torque to a final value on cars, at least. Trucks are a little higher, but final value of about 90 foot-pounds of torque. So I'll start out, do 3 steps in the pattern I mentioned. Do the first step, 30 foot-pounds of torque. Second step, 60 foot-pounds of torque. And then third step, 90 foot-pounds of torque. And then go over it again and just double check that you got 90 foot-pounds of torque all the way around in that crisscross pattern. That'll help walk it on and make sure that it goes on perfectly flush. You can do that with an automatic, with it in the air. With a stick, you might be able to leave it in gear. If your wheel spins on you, then I get as tight as I can in the air, and then I'll lower it down just enough. I'll put just enough weight on the tire so that as I'm torquing it, it doesn't spin on me. Because if you put all the weight of the car on it, it can throw it cockeyed. So, all right, now we're almost done. There's one last thing. After you've done both sides, of course, double check everything. Make sure your bolts are all tightened and torqued and all of that. Once you've completed both sides, now we need to get this piston pressed back out to where both pads are contacting the rotor, because remember, we pushed it in. I like to leave the cap off still for that. That way, as we push fluid back up in here, it does not create a vacuum, basically. So that's why I like to leave the lid off for this. Of course, make sure your fluid level's good and all that. So you'll get in the car once you've done both sides. This is fairly important, so pay attention. Start the car. Then you want to very lightly push the brakes, no more than halfway, and very slowly. This is going to put your pistons back out until the pads contact the rotors and your piston contacts the pads. The reason you want to do this, if you just get in it right now and drive, your pedal's going to go to the floor and it's not going to want to stop because you have your pistons fully recessed and you need it to get back out. You want to be careful doing this slow, because if you just go and push it too fast, some cars, the anti-lock system will think that you blew a brake line because it travels so far, so fast, so easily, and certain sensors can pick up on that, and it'll think that you have blown a brake line, and it'll actually lock out those brakes, whether you be doing front or rear, until further service. I've had it happen before. So that's why you want to push slowly, no more than halfway, like this, like what I'm doing right here. And then after a while, you will feel it start to firm back up to normal. There we go. Now I got pedal. It just firmed up on me. So depends on your fluid level and all that. You know, it might only take 3 times, it might take 12 times, but that's what you want to do. My pedal's normal already. It's been normal. I just pressed it a few extra times to be safe, and that's it. So thanks for watching. If this video helped you out, make sure you leave a like. If you want to see any other videos of the car, cold air intake install, header, I also have custom performance exhaust on it. It's just real cheap eBay, Amazon stuff. This is my beater car. I just wanted to have a little fun with it, play around with it, messing with it. Did some pulls in the cars and such. Anyways, if you want to see more of that, just check out the Altima playlist on the channel. Also, if you want to check out the Mustang, tons of videos on that as well, and I have its own playlist for that too. Hey, thanks for watching, appreciate it. Catch you on the next one.